My name is John Bender. I'm the Substance Abuse Program Manager here for the city. Over the next hour, we're going to go over different parts of the substance abuse policy, what you can and can't do, types of testing that we have, the self-referral process, some of the things that we offer with our substance abuse policy. Usually, I'd say if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and go ahead and ask them. But since we're actually recording this, so if I'm ever not here, they can still play it. I'm going to say, if you have any questions, just hold them till the end. And then once we're done with this, I'll open it up for a Q&A session. So if you have any questions during this, just write it down or something, we'll address it at the end. So again, here's what we're going to go over, the purpose, what you can't do, how the testing process works, how the self-referral process works if you ever feel like you have a substance abuse issue, and some signs and symptoms and health effects of drugs and alcohol. Purpose of our substance abuse policy, first and foremost, is safety. Safety is the number one thing. Safety for yourself, safety for your fellow employees, safety for people who maybe don't even work for the city, but they live in Albuquerque, they share the same streets that we do, that we work on. They're just trying to take their kids to school, they're trying to go to work, live their lives. We have an obligation to keep them safe. As city employees, we have that obligation, or at the very least, to not put them in any more harm than they usually are in their day-to-day lives. So safety is the number one thing. This isn't a witch hunt. The substance abuse policy isn't a witch hunt. I don't get paid commission for the number of positive tests that come across my desk, nothing like that. So it's not something where I'm just out to get people because they did a bad thing and they did the wrong thing and get rid of them. It's a safety issue. If you're showing up under the influence of alcohol during work hours, or if you're using drugs and that test comes back positive, that is a safety issue where you're putting yourself in harm's way, you're putting your fellow coworkers in harm's way. So safety is the biggest thing. To kind of tie in with that is to reduce the cost of risk. I'm part of risk management. They handle all the claims, all the tort claims, any type of workers' comp. So if you think of substance abuse in terms of risk management and lowering the cost of payouts, anything like that. Say you have an employee that is driving a city vehicle, gets into an accident, they're safety sensitive. So after that accident, they get drug tested. The test comes back negative, but that employee or that citizen of Albuquerque that they got into an accident with, they file a claim against the city. Hey, the city driver was at fault. I'm going to file a claim. I'm going to get paid. Well, they're probably going to get paid a couple thousand, whatever it is, cover the medical bills, things like that. Same situation, but now that city employee is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So you get a same accident, city employee's at fault, they come back for a drug test, that comes back positive. The citizen of Albuquerque has all kinds of injuries, they file a claim again, that turns from a couple $1,000s to maybe a couple $100,000 because the city's negligent, because the city put them at more risk by being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So, it's not going to come out of your pocket at the end of the day. If you did something like that, yeah, you're going to lose your job, and it might not cost you any extra, but just think about it, in terms of the taxpayers' dollars, which you pay taxes too. It's going to be a lot more expensive if you get into an accident and somebody's under the influence. So reducing the cost of risk, safety are the number one and I guess number two reasons of why we have a substance abuse policy. Number three, which is almost as important, federal regulations. The Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988 came out and said if you want to receive federal funding from the government, you have to have some sort of substance abuse policy in place. You have to have a policy, you have to have what you can and can't do, you have to have a substance abuse program for people who want to seek help, drug testing, education, awareness, etc. If we didn't have that stuff in place, and say we got audited by the federal government, which is due to happen within the next year, if we didn't have those things in place, they could fine us, they could pull our funding. So basically, if we want to receive federal funding, we got to play by the federal government's rules. Under the Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988, there's a couple of policies, CFRs, Code of Federal Regulations. Those are the regulations that we follow here at the city. 49 CFR Part 40 applies to everybody across the board. That's how we conduct our testing. Those are the rules that we follow in making sure that we test them right. Part 382, if you have a CDL, commercial driver's license, and you don't work in the transit department, FMCSA, you get a little bit stricter guidelines because just what you're doing. Same with Part 655. if you are in the transit department, there's going to be some extra regulations that follow you. So that's why we have a substance abuse test. Now, what we do and don't test for. I'm going to start out with what we don't test for. Addictive substances that we're not going to test for, that you can do all the, till your heart's content. We don't test for Facebook likes, so if you just want to get on the internet and troll for Facebook likes, you can do that all you want. Fast food, caffeine, Netflix, you can watch all the Netflix that you want, and we're never going to test for it. I got to figure out a better way to introduce this slide because it's kind of funny, but I just got crickets right here. Get it? Everybody watches TV, but nobody laughs at my joke. So, what we do test for. These are just some pictures of the substances that we do test for. Marijuana, cocaine, opiates, alcohol. We test for alcohol. Our testing of alcohol isn't just limited to Captain Morgan, but that's a friendly face that you guys might recognize. Various prescription pills, opiates, amphetamines. That's what we test for here at the city. I'll get into that a little bit deeper later. As far as legal but prohibited substances go, alcohol. We're not saying you can't have alcohol at all in your life, that you have to be completely straight edge, and you can't even drink on your own time. If that was the case, somebody else would be standing here talking to you today, because I like to have a nice cold beer from time to time, but I save it for my off time, I save it for the weekends. What we're saying is there's certain times you can't drink. Can't drink while you're on duty. You can't drink on your lunch break. If you're in uniform, you can't drink in uniform either. With that no drinking in uniform, perception is reality. You might be off the clock and say, well, I just don't feel like I didn't bring a change of clothes, but I want to go have a beer with my coworkers at the end of my shift. So what's the big deal? Well, perception is reality. You go to that bar, you're in full uniform, you got the City of Albuquerque emblem on your chest, you're having a couple beers. Somebody sees that and, just Joe Citizen, I want to do my due diligence, and I take a picture of that, send it to the news organization, whatever it is, and now all of a sudden it's on the news. Hey, city employees drinking while they're on the job. This is why we have these issues. This is why my trash didn't get picked up last week, because these people are out there having a beer instead of doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's not even the case in that situation. You were off duty. You just wanted to go have a beer. But again, perception is reality, and now it's the city's job to fight against what that picture says. So it's easier just don't drink while you're in uniform. For a lot of us, it's as simple as taking your name badge off, and you're good to go. But if you have something with a city emblem, if you're a sworn police officer, you shouldn't be drinking in uniform. So just kind of keep that in mind. General rule of thumb is no drinking 4 hours prior to the start of your shift. That, of course, is a rule of thumb. That is not the gospel. If you're knocking back your 15th shot of Jack Daniels 4 hours before your next shift is supposed to start, and you think that when you go into work, 4 hours later that you're going to be good to go, you're not. You're still going to have that alcohol in your system. And from what the top bullet says, anything 0.02 or greater is a positive alcohol test. There's no ifs, ands, or buts to it. This is a very concrete regulation that we have in place, a very concrete part of the policy. If you test 0.02 or greater, that is a positive test, and we're zero tolerance here at the city. That is grounds for termination. So the way the test works, if you've never had to take an alcohol test with the city or any other employers, is you go in for the test, you blow into the breathalyzer. If that breathalyzer zeroes across the board, you move on to the drug test. If it is 0.02 or greater, we wait 15 minutes for the machine to reset to rule out any sort of false positive that you might claim. I've heard mouthwash, I've heard cough medicine, I've heard old fruit could possibly do it, chewing gum. I've heard all of that, not sure how much of that I actually believe, but we give you the benefit of the doubt anyway. Hey, okay, we're going to allow this 15 minutes, the machine's going to reset, and then you try again. Whatever the results of that second test are is what we go with. So if it is 0.01999, we don't round up in that situation. That is a negative test. You got extremely lucky. Chances are I'm going to come down from my office, talk to you, remind you of the policy, and let you know how close you came to losing your job. But at the end of the day, that's a negative test, and you're not going to be disciplined for it. But if it is 0.02 or greater, that is a positive test. 0.02 is not a lot of alcohol in your system that would cause a positive test. And the trends that we see is the positive alcohol tests aren't coming from somebody holding a flask on them at work and taking a couple pulls while nobody's paying attention or having a beer at lunch. It's from partying too much the night before and not knowing when to cut it off, waking up the next morning thinking, hey, I can make it through this day, and getting pulled in for that random. Some of the more recent positive alcohol tests that we've had, we had one at the end of February. Came in, I believe it was March 1st. She came in for a random test. The night before was Fat Tuesday. So, it was something where I partied too much the night before, thought, hey, I'll just push through. Got that random test, tested, it was like 0.03, 0.04, something like that. Ended in disciplinary action. 2.5 weeks later, we had another situation, very similar situation. On the 18th of March, somebody got called in for a random. Everybody knows what the 17th of March is. Another situation is somebody partying too much the night before, coming into work, trying to push through it. Positive test, both face disciplinary action, which, like I said earlier, is zero tolerance. Termination. So be smart about when you're going to drink alcohol. Definitely don't do it while you're at work. And if you're going to drink it on your own time, be smart about it. Be responsible. Prescription drugs. So if you have anything with a major warning label, do not operate heavy machinery, may cause severe drowsiness. Those major warning labels that are associated with certain prescription drugs, the heavy painkillers, the oxys, the hydrocodones, etc., you have to disclose it to your supervisor. If you don't want to say what medication it is you are taking, you don't have to give the actual name, but you at least have to let your supervisor know, hey, I'm prescribed this medication, it's got a major warning label, and then it can go one of two ways. Way number one is, I have this medication, I take it at the end of my shift, when I get off work, my back is really hurting, but I can push through the work day. I take it at the end of my shift, helps me to sleep at night, it helps me to relax when I get home. The next day when I wake up, I'm not in as much pain. I go to work, rinse, repeat. I just do the same thing over and over again, but it doesn't negatively affect my ability to perform my job functions. Something like that is the supervisor's call, but the supervisor, chances are, will just say, okay, let me know if anything changes, and then you continue working. But if it's a situation where, hey, I have to carry this medication on me at all time, if I'm driving on my route and my back locks up, or I have some type of muscle spasm, I'm going to have to take it and I may be incapacitated for a few hours. In a situation like that, it's going to require clearance from the Employee Health Center. We have the Employee Health Center do it and not your own primary care physician do it for a couple of reasons. By all means, if your primary care physician clears you to return to work, take that note with you when you meet with our doctors here at the Employee Health Center. But we have our doctor do it because, one, he's knowledgeable and certified in the Department of Transportation regulations that we follow. So he knows the rules that we play by better than your own primary care physician might. He also knows the job description of what you do at the city better than your own primary care physician might. If you're telling the doctor what you do, you might leave something out unintentionally, whereas our doctor can pull up that information and say what exactly it is you do. And the other reason is just, if we just took your doctor's note for it and said, all right, this person's clear to return, and we didn't do our due diligence to check in and make sure that everything was right with it, you get cleared to return to work, you're working, you're driving along your route, you get into an accident, somebody gets injured, that post-accident test comes back positive, or whatever the case is, we just find out that there was that medication in your system and it contributed to the crash. That doctor who cleared you to return to work, his head is not going to be on the chopping block. It's going to be the city of Albuquerque's head on the chopping block. Hey, why did you allow this person to return to work? Nobody's really going to be looking at that doctor. All eyes are going to be on the city. So if it's a situation like that, we'd rather have a doctor that we can hold accountable, has his head on the chopping block right there with us. Here's some of the illegal substances that we test for. So these 5 are going to be in every single drug test that you take here for the city. Marijuana, crack and cocaine, amphetamines, PCP, and opiates. Every single test that you take. I'll say them again just so they stick to your memory a little bit better. Marijuana, crack and cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, and opiates. Every single test that you take here for the city will test for these. Now, something that kind of toes the line between legal controlled substance, a prescription substance, my last slide, and illegal, that is on this list. Medical marijuana. You cannot have a medical marijuana card and work for the city. Medical marijuana is legal in the state of New Mexico. The state of New Mexico says that there's medicinal value to marijuana. They believe in, having a medical marijuana prescription. However, federal government says that marijuana is still Schedule I narcotic and there is no medicinal value to it whatsoever. We play by the federal government's rules with that funding, like I said on one of the first slides. So, because the federal government says it's a Schedule I narcotic with no medicinal value, we view it as a Schedule I narcotic with no medicinal value. So, if you are a safety-sensitive employee and you test positive for marijuana, that is a positive test, zero tolerance, grounds for termination. If you are a non-safety sensitive employee, you cannot have a medical marijuana prescription either. If the city gets wind of it, that you have one, you can be brought in for a reasonable suspicion, that is grounds for a reasonable suspicion, and if you test positive, you could be disciplined accordingly. So, medical marijuana, legal in the state of New Mexico, not legal working for the city of Albuquerque. So the different types of results that you can have with your drug and alcohol test and the consequences of your results. If you have a negative test, congratulations, you get to continue to work for the city. If you have a positive test and you are safety sensitive, we are zero tolerance here for safety sensitive employees. That's grounds for termination. If anybody doesn't know the difference between safety sensitive and non-safety sensitive, easiest way to tell the difference, if you had to take and pass a pre-employment drug screening in order to be sitting here today, you are safety sensitive. You are subject to random post-accident testing, reasonable suspicion, etc. If you did not have to take a drug test to be sitting here where you're sitting today, you are non-safety sensitive, you are subject to reasonable suspicion, which I'll touch on a little bit later. So, non-safety sensitive employees, if you test positive, minimum disciplinary action is a 30-day suspension without pay, automatic referral into the substance abuse program. So if you're non-safety sensitive, you do get a second chance. Safety sensitive, we are zero tolerance. And if you refuse the test, no matter safety sensitive, non-safety sensitive, a refusal is the worst thing you can do. Automatic termination, it is considered a failed test and an act of insubordination. So not only is it, hey, you did not pass this drug and alcohol test, but you also prove to supervisors, to the city of Albuquerque, that you can't take simple instructions from a supervisor and go through with the test. If you get brought in for a reasonable suspicion test and you feel like that you're being wrongfully accused by your supervisor, that person is just out to get you, go through with the test, and then talk to HR later or something along those lines. But don't refuse the test just because you have a grudge against your supervisor, you think they're out to get you. Go through with the test. When it comes to my desk, if you're not showing signs and symptoms, or I don't believe there's enough evidence that you are reasonably under the suspicion, or if you're not under the influence of drugs or alcohol, then we're not going to go through with the test. It's going to get stopped right there. But if they have evidence, you're going to go through with that test. And, I'll talk about reasonable suspicion a little bit later. But if it's negative, you basically just got a couple days off work. So the consequences of your results if you have a CDL, so a commercial driver's license, if you work for the transit department, or if you work for one of those other departments and you have a CDL, a positive test is terrible for you because you test positive, you're immediately going to be removed from duty, obviously, and then you're going to be terminated. Also pretty obvious based on the last slide. But then where it follows you is an individual with a CDL who tests positive cannot perform safety-sensitive functions anywhere until they have successfully completed a return-to-duty process with a DOT-qualified substance abuse professional, a SAP. So what happens is if you test positive with your CDL and you have a CDL, you can't use that again until you've gone to a licensed substance abuse professional, which is not cheap, and then they refer you to a treatment center. You complete that treatment, you go back to that SAP, paying for another meeting with them, and they say, okay, you're low risk of relapse, here's a follow-up treatment, testing for anywhere from a period of 1 to 5 years. You get that, and then whoever hires you after that is going to have to take on that responsibility of doing your follow-up testing. So, once you complete all of that, which isn't going to be cheap, then whoever is going to hire you they have to adhere to your follow-up testing. They gotta let you know, or you gotta let them know. When they do the background check, they're gonna send me some paperwork and say, did this person ever test positive? Say, big fat yes, this is when it happened. And then in order for you to work for whatever company with your CDL, they're gonna have to say, okay, well, they completed their return to duty process, and we're gonna pay for their follow-up testing. So it's not really likely to happen. A lot of companies aren't gonna wanna pay that extra money for a liability of somebody who may test positive again. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you have a CDL, there are consequences outside of working for the city that are gonna follow you. So the collection procedures, when you take a drug and alcohol test, everything is conducted in accordance with 49 CFR Part 40. If you ever get curious, you can Google that, look it up. Once the employee is notified, transport the employee immediately to the testing site. There's no, hey, I gotta run to my locker real quick. Hey, can I go out to my car and get my ID? No, you're not, the employee is not supposed to leave the supervisor's site from the time they're notified until testing is complete. The employee can't have anything to eat or drink once being notified. I know that's kind of, people are like, what, why? Especially if, say you just go to the restroom and you come out and your supervisor's like, you just got pulled in for a random. Like, I just went. Well, if that happens, you go through the test anyway. You take the breath test, you take the alcohol test, and once that's done, you at least got to go into the restroom and give it an initial attempt. If you hit 45 milliliters, great. From what the collectors say, that even if you don't think you have to urinate at the time, your ability to be able to provide 45 milliliters of urine is fairly good. So even if you don't think you have to pee, you can go in there. Chances are you might be able to hit the 45 milliliter mark. But if not, no big deal. Put you on a shy bladder log, and the collector will administer you 8 ounces of water every half an hour until you've had 40 ounces. I'll touch on that a little bit later too, although I kind of just described it right now. But you only need 45 milliliters of urine to complete the test. If you think about it, and I have a nice visual aid, hopefully it transfers to the recording as well. This is 45 milliliters. This is all you need to complete the test. So it's roughly a shot and a half, if you're thinking in terms of alcohol, but it's really not a substantial amount. Even if you don't think you have to urinate, I believe in you that you can do it. Do I have any soon-to-be sworn officers in here today? No, they need 60 milliliters because they also get tested for anabolic agents. Direct observation. A direct observation will only happen if you give the collector a reason for it to happen. And there's a little temperature gauge. I got another visual aid. Show this off. This is the cup that you urinate into. There's a temperature gauge right here. As long as that urine is between 90 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, normal body temperature, then this little gauge changes colors on these little dots. Everything is good to go. But if all of them burn out immediately, it means it was too hot. If none of them register, it means it was too cold. The only way that urine could come out of your body and be less than 90 degrees or more than 100 degrees is if you were dead or dying. So that means something was up. And we're not actually accusing you of trying to cheat the test and using urine that you brought in. But we know, come on. And in that situation, we know what's going on. So what happens is we discard, or that urine gets canceled. That test gets run, but it gets canceled. There's not going to be a result of that with the employee's name. Then what we do is we say, okay, this next one needs to be under direct observation. Next time you have to urinate, you go into the restroom. Collector of the same sex as you will go into the restroom with you. The employee will then have to drop his or her pants down to mid-thigh, raise their shirt up past their belly button. So everything is on display. Then got to do a 360 showing that nothing on that employee could conceal or hold, a bag or bottle of urine. So 360, and then the collector will directly observe that employee urinating into the cup for that collection. So it's kind of privacy invading. Some say it might be a lot privacy invading, but at the end of the day, it's only going to happen if you give the collector a reason for it to happen. So keep that in mind. That's direct observation. People might not like it, but we know why it's happening. All right, here's a couple flow charts of how the testing process goes from start to finish. With a refusal, that is the easiest way to complete a drug test from beginning to end. You refuse it, that's simple. You're removed from duty and we proceed with the disciplinary action. don't have to file any paperwork. We don't have to wait for any results. You don't want to take the test? Cool. See ya. Brush up on your resume. You're good to go. I'll mark it down in my log. But if the employee goes through with the drug test, they take the drug test. It's a split specimen. That specimen is collected. That's why there's 2 vials. I'll get into that a little bit later, so just hold on to that thought. It's sent to lab. It's analyzed by the lab. The MRO, the medical review officer, the doctor over there at the employee health center, gets those results. If there was nothing in the drug test that could have set it off as a positive, it's marked a negative. He verifies it as a negative. He gives me those results. Test complete. Simple as that. You don't get notified on a negative test. We only notify people on a positive test. So if you take a test maybe a couple days before, you went to a Snoop Dogg concert and sat too close to some people who were blazing it up, and you're a little bit worried that that contact high is going to get you positive, and you take a test. If you haven't got a phone call from anybody in about a week, you're in the clear. Buy better tickets next time. You don't have to worry about it. But if there's something in your system that could set off a positive test, you will know about it before I know about it. So what happens is you take the test, sent to lab, analyzed by the lab, MRO gets those results. Oh, instead of negative, there's a positive substance in there. There was something that we test for that set it off. So it's a positive test. Again, you will know about it. The doctor will call you and say, this is your point to plead your case. Is there any reason why you would have had a positive test? Sometimes there are valid reasons. For example, Adderall could lead to a positive amphetamines test. So if you have an Adderall prescription, hey, this prescription, you bring it in, doctor checks it out, makes sure that it's prescription in your name, that it's valid, it's not expired. As long as everything checks out, that's a negative test. I don't even know that conversation happened. That's between you and the doctor. I get it as a negative. There's no negative with an asterisk next to it saying, hey, watch out for this guy, put him on the next list. There's nothing like that. It's just a verified negative test complete, everything is good. But if whatever is in your system should not have been in your system, it's not a prescription, or it's marijuana, anything like that, then you got no reason to have it in there. It's a verified positive test. We go back to that whole remove from duty, proceed with disciplinary action thing. Simplest rule, and this seems like common sense, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Don't put other people's prescriptions into your body. That's a simple way to stop from avoid a positive drug test. I'm going to play out a scenario for you that happened a while back, and then I want to take a show of hands of who believes that it was true and who believes it wasn't. So there was a gentleman that tested positive a little while back. He tested positive for amphetamines. During that MRO verification, the doctor said, hey, do you have a prescription or anything like that? He said, well, I don't have an Adderall prescription, but my son does. And what happened was a couple nights ago, like a day or two before the test, I can't remember what it was, I was pretty drunk. I was pretty close to blackout drunk, and at the end of the night, I went to go take my medication and my vitamins, etc. My wife handed it to me. She was pretty drunk too. I took it without really paying attention because I was drunk. Woke up the next morning, noticed that I felt a little strange. I'm 99% certain that my wife accidentally gave me my son's Adderall. All right, so show of hands. Who believes that story? All right, we got a couple. All right. Oh, okay, this is a pretty good turnout. So I'm guessing everybody else thinks the guy was lying. All right. I believe the guy's story. I was like, that sounds convincing. I've drank before. I've been pretty drunk. I've never taken somebody's Adderall, but I don't always pay attention either. So I'm not saying that it would happen to me, but I'm saying I could see it happening. Bottom line, doesn't matter that I believed him, that I wanted to believe him. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, he had that positive result. The drug test said positive. That was a prescription that he was not allowed to have in his body. It was not in his name. He has to accept the consequences that came with that drug and alcohol test. So that was a positive test result, resulted in that disciplinary action. So don't put other people's prescriptions into your body. Be careful about what you're taking. If grandma offers you some cough syrup because you're feeling a little under the weather, make sure there's no codeine in it. Because at the end of the day, if you get brought in for a random and that's in your system, grandma's codeine or my son's Adderall isn't a valid excuse of why you tested positive. So a shy bladder situation, I kind of talked about this already, but I'll get into it a little deeper. When you take the drug test, 45 milliliters is what we need. You go in there, if you don't hit the mark, that gets discarded. No big deal. You got a 3-hour timeline. The collector will give you 8 ounces of water every half an hour until you've had 40 ounces. So that takes 2 hours for all of that. Then you have another hour for that to work its way through your body. You have 3 hours on this timeline. If at any point you feel like you have to urinate, that you're ready to hit that 45 milliliter mark, you let the collector know. You go into the restroom, you hit 45 milliliters, or maybe you exceed 45 milliliters, that's great. Test complete, you continue going back to work. So you provide 45 milliliters, test complete, left side of the chart covered. But if after the 3-hour timeline, you still have not provided 45 milliliters of urine, this test is stopped. So we're never going to get a positive test result from it. We're never going to get a negative test result from it. It's going to go 2 different ways now. It's initially called a shy refusal. Now earlier, I said a refusal is the worst thing that you can do when it comes to drug and alcohol tests. This is bad. It's not that bad yet. So we don't just go ahead and terminate you in this situation. What happens is the employee is placed on administrative leave with pay, and we schedule a doctor's appointment. I believe regulation says that we have to do it within 72 hours. I like to get it done within the first 24 to 36, depending on that employee's schedule. So the employee gets placed on administrative leave. We schedule a doctor's appointment. At that doctor's appointment, the doctor will look through the medical history. They might draw blood. They might have the employee provide a urine sample. This isn't to clear the employee's name in the result of a drug and alcohol test. Like I said, that ship has already sailed. This is to look for valid medical reasons why they couldn't produce 45 milliliters of urine in a 3-hour time period. So they're looking for health reasons, like, drugs aren't what's important anymore. We're trying to figure out why you couldn't produce 45 milliliters of urine in this time. So that doctor will do a write-up of all of his or her findings. They will then give that write-up to the MRO, the main doctor over there at the health center. He will then read all of that, look at all of the notes, and come to the determination, is there a valid medical explanation? Is there a valid medical explanation why this employee could not provide 45 milliliters of urine after being given 40 ounces of water in a 3-hour time frame? If there is a valid medical explanation, and we're not just talking, stage fright, we're talking major like kidney issues, prostate issues, some type of medication that the employee was on that prevented them from being able to properly urinate or dehydrated them out, something like that. If there is valid medical explanation, it's a canceled test. That employee returns back to work. No harm, no foul. Hey, there was a health reason why you couldn't do this. You go back to work. Hopefully that health reason gets addressed because you're still going to be subject to randoms later on. But at the end of the day, that employee gets to continue to work. Now, if there is not a valid medical explanation, then that's considered a refusal of the test, and that employee is subject to disciplinary action in accordance with a refusal, which is zero tolerance termination. So I say all of that, and then I say this. It's silly to think that being able to provide 45 milliliters of urine is an important part of your job, but if you are a safety-sensitive employee, at the end of the day, it is an important part of your job. Because if you can't provide it, you could be terminated for it. So if you have any health reasons, if you think, yeah, I'd be a little bit worried if I had to take this test that I couldn't provide 45 milliliters of urine, not a substantial amount, in 3-hour time. If you're a little bit nervous about that, go to the doctor. Go get it checked out. Because at the very least, you have it documented in your medical history. So when you come to that appointment that is going to decide the fate of your career here with the city, you'll have something in your notes. Say, hey, this is where I've had this problem before in 2012 and again in 2014 or whatever it is. But if you go to that doctor's appointment, just hoping that the doctor's going to take your word for it and say, oh, well, I've had this issue before. Oh, well, you never went to the doctor and I can't find anything in my findings. Did you really have this problem? Well, yeah, the last time I took a random, I was almost a shy refusal in that time, but I just barely got the 45 milliliters out. I've had this problem for a while. Well, you never went to the doctor. Then you're hoping that the doctor that decides the fate of your career is going to take your word for it when he needs things like science and facts and evidence to help his case out. So don't rely on the doctor just saying, oh yeah, finding something. If you're having that problem, go get it looked at. Because when you think about it, 45 milliliters is not a substantial amount. I got a water bottle over here. This is the last of my little training aids. This isn't really a training aid. This is just what I drink out of daily. This is 32 ounces. If I drank this entire thing in a 3-hour or 2-hour time frame, I'd be running to the restroom probably every 45 minutes to an hour for half the day. So you get this plus another 8 ounces, and this is all you have to provide. It's something that you should be able to do unless you either have a legitimate health reason, in which case go to the doctor, get checked out, or if you're just trying to wait out the clock and hope that you can get out of doing this test, which isn't going to work. So if you have any medical issues, go get it checked out. Because Shy Bladder doesn't care. You could have been an employee of the month for 6 years running. You could be 6 months away from retirement. If you're a Shy Refusal, there's no, hey, he's a good employee, so we're just going to overturn the Shy Refusal. No. So get it checked out. The appeals process and split specimen testing. Remember earlier I said I was going to talk about split testing? Now that time has come. So if the employee takes a drug test and they test positive, but they say, I've never taken a drug in my life, I'm completely straight edge, it was a lab error, that employee has the opportunity to clear their name. What happens is the employee says, I would like to order the split specimen test. They come into our office with a $128 cashier's check. This is a deposit. This isn't a payment. So they give us that $128 cashier's check. We call the lab and order the split specimen. What happens is the lab that tested the first one, because one of these both gets sent to the lab. This one gets tested. This one gets stored in accordance with HHS guidelines. So we call that lab and we say, hey, they want the split specimen tested. What that lab does is they take that one that's being stored, they send it to another location not affiliated with that first lab, and they run a test. Whatever the results of this test are is what we go with. So if it's a positive test, it just confirms that this one was positive as well. That employee is subject to the disciplinary action in accordance with positive. Since they're out that $128 cashier's check because, hey, that was a positive test. City shouldn't have to pay with it. You said it was pay for it. You said it was going to be clean. And then they face that disciplinary action. But if it's negative, then they get to return to work because during this time, I left that out, they're going to be on administrative leave while this testing is being done. So they get to return to work, no harm, no foul. Hey, there was an error with the test. That's not on you, that's on the lab. Return to work. Here's your $228 cashier's check back because if you didn't do anything wrong, there's no reason you should have to pay for it. So we reimburse them that money. And they get the bragging rights of being the first person in the history of City of Albuquerque drug and alcohol testing policy to have overturned a positive test with a negative split specimen. So 20 plus years of drug and alcohol testing, it hasn't happened. By all means, if somebody is innocent, I'm not trying to dissuade you from ever ordering a split specimen test. But it came from the same urine stream. It was once in the same cup together. Just because it got tested at 2 different sites or it was in 2 different vials at one point doesn't mean that those results are going to come back different if you were doing something wrong. So if you're completely negative and you're sure that you didn't do anything wrong and that lab made the mistake, by all means, we'll order the split specimen test and try to clear your name. But if you're doing it to try to save face in the event of disciplinary action, it's not going to work. It's not factored into your disciplinary action. And if you're about to lose your job, you might want to save that $128. Different types of testing that we have. Random testing. Employees are selected for randoms through a scientific process, scientifically valid formula, DOT approved, etc. It's a computer program that we have. What happens is we upload a spreadsheet. It's got all the safety sensitive employees' names on it, breaks them into their various little categories by a couple little markers. They get categorized, press a few more buttons, and it shoots out us names of who needs to be tested. We test 25% of all safety sensitive employees annually. So in theory, you have a 1 in 4 shot every year being tested. Sometimes those odds are going to be in your favor, sometimes they're not. It's not something where if you get tested in January we pull your name out and you don't have to worry about it again until the next calendar year starts. Every time we run a testing pool, you have the same odds of being selected. And again, sometimes those are going to be in your favor, sometimes they're not. When I did training over at Transit about a year ago, there was an employee who said, well, I've been working for the city for 18 years and I've only been brought in for random twice. Okay, well, but then this past summer, we had a gentleman in a month-long period, he got pulled in for random 3 times. Yeah. He wasn't too happy when he got pulled in that 3rd time. I don't think he was happy when he got pulled in the 2nd time either, but I didn't see him that time. But the 3rd time, he was a little sassy. So yeah, sometimes the odds are going to be in your favor, sometimes they're not. But it's a scientifically valid formula. We can't take bribes from supervisors. Hey, test this guy, don't test this one. We don't follow your vacation whereabouts and find out, hey, this person went on vacation in Colorado. Let's test them as soon as they get back. We don't do anything like that. I can't hold grudges. If we're leaving this building, at the end of the day, you and I get into an accident, and we call each other a bunch of mean names. I can't remember your name, go back to my office and make sure that you get tested, every other week for the next 4.5 years. That's not my style. I'm not that type of guy anyway, but even if I was, I couldn't do it. So yeah, we can't manipulate the system at all. So if you are that person who gets tested 3 times in a month, or 2 times in 6 months, you feel like you're getting picked on. Oh, I know it's not random. Oh, this and that. You guys are just out to get me, or my supervisor's out to get me. That is not the case. Nobody's out to get you. Nobody can manipulate the system. We can't change it. And if you think we're out to get you, if you think me and my staff that we are out to get you, if the only time that you deal with us is when you come in for a random, you don't know us outside of work or anything like that, we barely recognize you the second time that you come in, just think, why would substance abuse pick on me of all people and make me get tested 3 times in a month or anything like that? We don't just draw names out of a hat and say, hey, let's mess with this person for 2017 and make sure they get tested a bunch. Even if we wanted to, we can't. So we're not going to manipulate the system to just mess with people. And I'm sure you guys are all great at your job. You guys are all great employees for the city. So don't take offense to this, but none of you are important enough for us to mess with and make sure that you get tested extra. You guys are all great people, but nobody is more important than the other that, hey, we need to test this person a little bit extra than somebody else. Just kind of keep that in mind. We're not going to pick on you, just pick on you. There are 5 different testing pools as far as the randoms go. If you work in the transit department and you're not security, but you are safety sensitive, that's going to be category number 1. If you have a CDL, but you don't work in the transit department, category number 2. 3 is public safety, so anybody who carries a firearm, sworn officers, security, open space rangers, also firefighters are going to be in this, public safety, of course. They're all in this category. SID, this is just a little fun fact. Special Investigations Division, they are part of APD. They're doing all that high-speed secret squirrel stuff. They're undercover units, drug, gangs, etc. They're the only people that are going to be in 2 different pools. So they're in the SID pool and they're in the public safety pool. So those people can get a little bit tested a little bit more than everybody else. But guess what? When they come in for that test, those guys are never in a bad mood. It's a break from their normal job. So just look at it at that. If you are that person who gets brought in for a couple extra tests, you're taking a break from the normal monotony of your daily activities. Category number 5 is the safety sensitive category. That's all others deemed to be safety sensitive by the city of Albuquerque. So for whatever reason, your job says you probably need to be drug tested, you receive federal funding, you have access to certain things, you work with kids, you work with seniors, whatever the case is, but you don't fit in one of those other categories. So that's like a catch-all category of safety sensitive employees. Pre-employment testing, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because you're already past that point in your life. If you're sitting here, just know that if you had to take a pass drug test, you're safety sensitive, you're subject to all the other testing. Also, if you miss work, if you're a safety sensitive employee and you miss work for more than 90 days, in order to come back to work, you got to have a negative drug screening. So if you go on military orders or anything like that, when you come back, you got to have a negative drug screening. Reasonable suspicion. All employees are subject to reasonable suspicion. So if you're a non-safety sensitive employee and you've kind of been zoning out, like, none of this really applies to me, you haven't been paying attention, this is where you're going to want to wake back up, because everybody is subject to reasonable suspicion testing. If I showed up under the influence, I could be brought in for a reasonable suspicion test. But in order for a reasonable suspicion test to happen, the supervisor must have specific, contemporaneous, and articulable observations concerning behavior, speech, what else? Body odors, all the signs and symptoms that go along with drug and alcohol use. What do I mean by those buzzwords? Specific and articulable. We'll cover those ones first. Specific. The supervisor can't just say the employee was acting weird, so I brought him in for a drug and alcohol test. All right, what was that employee doing to make you come to the conclusion that acting weird was due to drug and alcohol? Well, the employee showed up for his 10 p.m. shift 20 minutes late. When he came into the building, he was wearing his sunglasses, even though it was dark outside and you don't need sunglasses inside. When I asked the employee why he was 20 minutes late for his shift, he stared at me blankly for 15 to 20 seconds and asked me to repeat the question. When I repeated the question, he stared at me blankly again for about 5 to 10 seconds and then started giggling uncontrollably. Around that time, I had the employee take his sunglasses off. I noticed his eyes were extremely bloodshot. Around that time, I also noticed a faint smell of marijuana odor. Based on this criteria, I had reason to believe he was under the influence of drugs or alcohol, so I brought him in for a reasonable suspicion drug and alcohol test. That versus he was acting weird. One's a lot more detailed, a lot more specific. There are certain things where when you hear it, you're like, yeah, that person was probably under the influence of something. That versus he was acting weird. Acting weird is not a reason to bring somebody in. You have to have some of those key characteristics consistent with drug and alcohol use. Articulable. Everything that I just said, the supervisor has to be able to translate that to paper. So we have a reasonable suspicion form. That is basically their sworn statement of saying this is what happened to make me come to this conclusion. You've got to be able to articulate it. You've got to be able to translate it to paper. Contemporaneous. It's got to happen at the time. Can't punish somebody on Tuesday for something they did on Monday. If that person shows up Monday night in that situation that I just described, nobody does anything about it, and then the next day they're perfectly fine, but another supervisor, hears about what happened the day before and says, well, those drugs are still going to be in that person's system. I'm going to bring them in for reasonable suspicion today. But they're not actively showing the signs and symptoms that day. You can't test them. They have to be actively showing the signs and symptoms. Goes back to that whole, it's a safety issue, not a witch hunt. The safety issue is not Tuesday when the person's acting normal, shows up on time, doesn't have red eyes, isn't giggling uncontrollably, whatever the case is. The safety issue was Monday night when they were obviously under the influence. That is when you don't want somebody performing safety-sensitive functions or is putting people at risk in doing whatever they're doing. That's when you got to address it. You can't punish somebody on Monday or on Tuesday for something they did on Monday. When you notice the signs and symptoms, you have to act on it immediately because that's where the safety hazard is. If it was a witch hunt, you'd be able to get them the next day or 2 days later, whatever it is. But if it's a safety issue, you've got to get them at the time. They're not actively showing signs and symptoms, you can't test for it. The only time you can test for it if they're not showing signs and symptoms is if they're dumb enough to admit to drug and alcohol use. If, hey, you were acting a little strange yesterday. Oh, well, I was super high. Okay, now we're going down for reasonable suspicion. If they admit to drug use, you can bring them in for a reasonable suspicion test. Or paraphernalia, some type of evidence. If you're walking behind them, they go to get their phone out of their pocket, and when they do, it catches their bag of weed and then just falls right on the floor. If they're not showing the signs and symptoms, that is enough evidence to bring them in for reasonable suspicion. Post-accident testing. So with the post-accident testing, the operating employee can be tested, and anybody who contributed to the accident. We need the test done immediately. After 8 hours, we can't test for alcohol anymore, but we want it done within 2 hours. So get the employees there as soon as possible. Do not delay medical treatment in order to administer the drug and alcohol test. So if the employee breaks his or her leg, is getting loaded into the ambulance, you can't say, hey, we'll drop you off at UNMH after we go to the employee health center, but you got to take this drug and alcohol test. Don't allow that to happen. Let them get the treatment. We'll work something out, in that process. But here's alcohol testing or the post-accident form. This is, if the supervisor just follows this is an easy way to determine whether or not the employee needs drug and alcohol testing for a post-accident. And remember, post-accident is only safety-sensitive employees. If if you're non-safety sensitive and you're driving a city vehicle and you get into an accident, you can't be post-accident tested. Now, if your supervisor gets there and smells alcohol on you, or there's a pill bottle on the floor, or there's a joint in the ashtray, I don't know if cars still have ashtrays anymore, but let's say that happens, you can get brought in for reasonable suspicion, but you can't get tested for post-accident. Is the employee safety sensitive? Boom, easy. We'll just go to the highlighted red boxes because I did that for a reason. If there was no fatality, because if there's a fatality, there's going to be a post-accident test. Did an individual involved in the accident suffer injuries requiring immediate medical treatment away from the scene of the accident? So not necessarily taken away in an ambulance, but say the accident happens and the supervisor's talking to the person, the citizen of Albuquerque that the city employee got into an accident with, and they say, well, I don't want to ride in the ambulance, I don't want treatment there because insurance is expensive. But once we're done here, I'm going to go to the urgent care by my house. If they voice that concern, that's going to meet that criteria. The next criteria, was there disabling damage to any vehicle involved in the accident, requiring the vehicle to be either towed away from the scene or removed from operation. So something like a flat tire can be fixed at the scene, that's not going to meet the criteria. But something where it's towed away, that's going to meet the criteria. So one of those two things needs to happen. Not both, just one of them. If one of them happens, you go to the ultimate deciding question, the other highlighted box that you probably can't read, but I'm going to read it for you, so don't even worry. Using the best information available to you at the scene of the accident, can you completely discount the driver or operator as a contributing factor to the accident? So if the city driver was a contributing factor to the accident, you would test. But if there was nothing that driver could have done to have prevented the accident, you cannot test. Say that a bus driver's just sitting at a stoplight, waiting for the light to turn green, like most normal people do. Somebody behind them is Snapchatting their whereabouts in downtown Albuquerque, doesn't see a giant bus in front of them, slams right into the back of it. So, goes to the hospital, disabling damage, all of it. There was nothing that driver could have done in that situation to have prevented the accident. They're minding their own business, doing what they're supposed to be doing. It was the other person that didn't follow the rules. So in that situation, you would not test the city employee. Return to duty testing. So this happens. I'll talk about the self-referral process on the next slide, but just know if you go through the self-referral process, in order to return to work, you got to pass a return to duty test. Before that, you have to pass a pre-return to duty. It's like a preseason game, and then this is a game time one. And it'll be scheduled by the substance abuse professional before you take the test. It's an entire process. Follow-up testing. If you're in if you seek help, you refer into our substance abuse program. Once you're done with that, you're going to be subject to follow-up testing. The frequency of the follow-up testing is going to be dependent on whatever that substance abuse professional or counselor, depending on the situation, says to us of, hey, this person needs to be tested anywhere from a period of 1 to 5 years, any number of tests in that testing period. It could be 1 test a month, 2 tests a month, 1 test a month for the first year, 2 tests a month for the second year, and then 1 test a month for the next 3 years. It can be any combination that you can think of. But self-referral process, an employee may self-refer into our substance abuse program at any time, except for within 24 hours being notified of a random post-accident reasonable suspicion drug test. So they have all the time in the world to enter into our substance abuse program. They can't do it when they've been notified of a test. It can't be, hey, we got to go downtown, you've been selected for random. I had a moment of clarity, I have a drug problem, and I want to seek help for it. That's not how the process works, but they have all the time in the world to self-refer, before that, as long as they haven't been notified of a drug test. What happens is they come into my office. It's completely confidential. Department director, maybe a designee in that department knows about it. Nobody else needs to know. It's a need-to-know basis, and they don't. So it's completely confidential. That employee is placed on FMLA for up to 90 days. So as long as they have that FMLA, it's going to draw from their sick and vacation time, and their job is going to be protected for up to 90 days. They're going to be removed from duty. Sole focus is getting cleaned and sober. What happens is I set them up an appointment with a substance abuse professional or a substance abuse counselor, depending on the situation. They will meet with this counselor. The city pays for that. What happens is they meet with the counselor. The counselor will do like a 2-hour session with them and then say, here's a list of treatment centers in the greater Albuquerque area that best fit your needs. It is then that employee's responsibility to choose one of those. You get enrolled into treatment, attend the treatment, complete the treatment. That counselor or substance abuse professional will monitor the employee's treatment through the entire process, and then at a certain point will say, hey, this employee's ready to return to work. Once they're ready to return to work, that's when they pass that pre-return to duty and that return to duty drug and alcohol test. And as long as those are negative, they return back to work. They're going to be subject to the follow-up testing that I also talked about, but they received help. We gave them time off in order to attend that, to get the help that they needed. They return to work. They're going to be subject to a little bit of follow-up testing, but other than that, that's just kind of help them stay on the right path. But it's a fairly successful program. So if anybody has any reason to self-refer or whatever, that program's there for you. Just got to make sure that you have the FMLA, and you only have 90 days to complete the treatment from start to finish. If you exceed that 90 days, that's a violation of the agreement and can result in termination. But most people are returned to work around the 60-day mark, so 90 days isn't something that they should get too concerned about. All right, signs and symptoms of and health effects of various drugs and alcohol that we test for. So alcohol, chances are most of us in this room have either been under the influence of alcohol or dealt with people under the influence of alcohol, so we kind of know how this one plays out. Impairs your senses, impairs your mental state. You get a lack of coordination, a slow reaction rate. It impairs your judgment, your ability to dance, slurs your speech, and it has a very distinctive odor. Some of the health effects are dependency. Alcohol dependency is going to cause a lot of liver diseases, stomach issues, ulcers. If you're drinking while you're pregnant, birth defects. It's also going to increase your risk of cancer. Cannabis, marijuana, whatever you want to call it. Signs and symptoms. Of course, you're going to have the red eyes. It's got a very distinctive odor as well. There's going to be the dry mouth, the cotton mouth that goes along with it. Possibly a chronic fatigue of, the person just having trouble staying awake, maybe makes them a little bit sleepy. Some of the health effects. If you're smoking it, you're going to have lung irritation, emphysema-like conditions. Smoking while pregnancy, they're just ingesting marijuana while pregnancy. There's a high risk of pregnancy issues. Health benefits, according to the federal government, there are none. Amphetamines. So this one's going to get your heart racing. Very hyperexcitability, restless, dilated pupils. Pupils are a big tell with a lot of these drugs and alcohol. It's a good way. Most pupils are going to be like a normal state. If they're super pinpoint or dilated, very big, then that's an easy tell that you might be under the influence of drugs or alcohol, because that's not something an employee can necessarily control. You can't. It's pretty difficult to control the size of your pupils. Anyway, moving on. Profuse sweating, confusion and panic, an inability to concentrate, and it might make you a little bit extra aggressive. Formication, that's where they get the scabs, and they constantly pick the scabs. Pretty gross stuff. Health effects, strong physical dependence. Insomnia, of course, it's got your heart racing, you're redlining your body, you're not going to be able to sleep as well. And it's going to cause lots of heart, brain problems. You're putting chemicals into your body that you really shouldn't be putting into your body. And when you come down from that, it's going to lead to physical and mental depression. Cocaine and crack, very similar. Wide mood swings. Another sign and symptom is you're going to have a runny and irritated nose, just sniffing all the time. Paranoid, anxiety, or anxious. You're going to be very agitated. Again, insomnia, hyperexcitability. So similar to amphetamines, you're not sleeping, your heart is redlining, your body is working overtime. So what's that going to cause on the backside? When your heart's racing like that, it's going to cause blood pressure issues, physical dependence. You're going to have lots of heart problems just because when you're redlining it all the time, it's going to cause some problems on the back end. If you're driving a nice sports car, you're not going to have those RPMs in the red all the time every time you're driving it. Think of it similar with cocaine, crack, or amphetamines. Opiates, flip side. It's going to bring you down, give you that relaxed, euphoric feeling, kind of that drowsy fatigue. It's going to impair your coordination. Highly addictive, increased tolerance, chasing the dragon. shoot up once, it's a euphoric feeling, then you need more and more to try to achieve that feeling, to chase that dragon. Dragons aren't real, spoiler. So, it's going to cause that problem. You're never going to catch that thing that doesn't exist. And PCP. PCP alters your sense of reality, puts you in another dimension. Impaired coordination, confusion, agitation, extreme mood swings. There's also a high risk of overdose. It's a very unstable drug. Hallucinations, personality changes, possible memory loss. Information slide. So if you can't remember everything I said over the last hour, you check out the substance abuse policy. You can just Google it. It's on the city's webpage as well. Just make sure 2015 is the most current version of the substance abuse policy, and make sure you're looking at the right one. So there's a citywide policy. There's if you work in the transit department. There's if you have a CDL. There's these certain policies. There's my contact information if anybody ever has any questions. There's a couple of locations where you're going to get tested. It's Monday through Friday. You meet here at the Employee Health Center. If it's any of the after-hours stuff, there's a Quest Diagnostics location on San Mateo and Alameda. Like you're going out to Balloon Fiesta, right there on San Mateo. Oddly enough, it's right next to a brewery. But all right, that is my time. Do I have any questions? Nobody? All right. Well then, welcome to the city. Hopefully a lot of you, hopefully I don't ever have to deal with you, except for maybe the occasional random. And if I do deal with you, I'd say hopefully it's in a positive light, but in my world, positive means bad. So hopefully it's just a good experience.